Hello, I'm Royal Seely, aka Minionette, and welcome to my channel. Today I'm bringing you here to discuss my experience at Kei-Con 2023, located at the W Toronto in Canada. This was an event that I was looking forward to as soon as it was announced, as I live on the eastern side of North America, and a majority of Lolita and J fashion events tend to happen on the west side of the US or in Europe. So to have an event that was located on the same section that I was really exciting. Now, at the time of recording this, it is about 2 months past since the actual event, which was end of September. However, I'm someone who likes to journal, and especially when I travel. So I was able to reflect a bunch during this time, as well as look over the notes that I had written and really reflect on the experience as a whole. So KCON 2023, I ended up going with some of my friends, and we ended up renting a car to drive up into Canada, which was a really exciting experience. It was during the beginning of the fall months, so we got to see a lot of beautiful foliage the further north we drove. And overall, it was a pretty easy drive despite the length of time. It was also the longest road trip I've done yet, which was really exciting. This is the first Lolita fashion specific convention I've gone to. I went to Teco in, I believe it was end of July of this year. So a few months had passed since. But that was my really only comparable experience to KCON. So I was really excited to see how it would differ going to an anime convention where that tends to be the main focus. However, they do have a really strong J fashion community, so it's a con that has more J fashion than others, versus an event where the focus was J fashion and Lolita fashion, which I'm very passionate about. But we ended up staying a few blocks away from the W Toronto and walking over, but the location itself seemed to be readily accessible from public transit and other modes of transit, which was very nice. Leading up to the event, attendees were reminded of the con's COVID policy and encouraged to bring proof of vaccination. They did reiterate as it got closer to the event that this was a masking mandatory event, which I personally appreciated. I was going to wear one anyway just because I tend to wear fashion masks with a lot of my Lolita looks. It was also during a time where COVID cases were on the rise, and I have some immunocompromised people in my life, so I tend to be very mindful when I'm able to. So it was really nice to have that kind of support going into it. I know that the reminder for the vaccinations was, for some people, a bit short notice, and it was also overlapping with when they released a new COVID booster. I got mine as soon as I was able to, which was about a week and a half previous to the event, but a lot of people were not as lucky. You were still allowed to attend, it was just important that you stay maxed, which I'm really glad didn't seem to be an issue when I was there. So the event ran for 3 days, and each day was a separate ticket of attendance, which I thought was nice. That way you could pay for the days you wanted to attend. Each ticket was labeled after the main event of that day. So Friday was the swap meet, Saturday was the fashion show, and Sunday was only for the tea party. I ended up going to all 3 days, and I will show a breakdown of the prices here. At checkout for the tea party, you were able to list your dietary restrictions, which I appreciated. I did that for the Teco tea party that I went to, and while the J Fashion staff were mindful, the catering crew was not. So I ended up not having much I could eat just because I'm vegetarian and lactose intolerant, and everything had dairy in it. This time I came prepared for my travels. I brought my Lactaid with me. So, worst case scenario, if something happened, I would be okay. Now, you might notice that these prices are more expensive than you would typically expect for a convention, especially an anime convention. To me, this makes a lot of sense because this is located in a big city, but also more specifically because it focuses on a niche fashion. Going to anime conventions for Lolita fashion they are able to have the buffer of sponsorship support for the main event, which is anime or gaming. Whereas Lolita Fashion, your sponsorships are going to be a lot more limited financially. So it makes sense to me that the ticket price would be higher as you expect a lower turnout. And you obviously you want to make sure that like there's no financial hardships on those organizing the event. Speaking of sponsorships, the sponsorships for this event were headed by Tooth Decay Accessories, and I think that they did a phenomenal job. As you were in the check in area, you were given a tote bag with at least one raffle ticket that you could use during any of the raffles, which there were so many of them. Every single panel had at least one item to raffle away, if not several, and that made the event feel a lot more special and just really cool. Um, yeah. So now on to the actual event. On Friday, the swap meet day, it started a bit later in the day, which is very accommodating for people who get out of work later on. Um, and it was a shorter window. So attendees, general attendees who were not setting up a swap table, were allowed to sign in starting at 7. You needed your proof of vaccination card as well as all your details. So, yeah. And the check in line, it's expected for these types of events, is that it will take a bit to get checked in. I wasn't too worried about it, especially because I came with friends so I could talk to them or the other attendees nearby. And it passed relatively quickly, and I think, given the overall crowd, that the staff handled it very well. When you walked past the check in point, you had two vendors that were set up. The first being High Newly and Iris Garden. They were the main feature for this event. They focus more on Gothic and classical Lolita based pieces. This is not usually my expertise, although I have been getting more interested in Gothic and classic fashion, so I was really excited to see what they had to offer, especially as they tend to be a more favorite for my friends. So I was really curious to what they would bring to this event. Next to them, there was a Dolphy booth, which does more alternative J fashion and kawaii fashion styles. Then you had the vendors hall, which is where the swap meet was being held on Friday. Aside from that were two panel rooms. One was the more traditional panel room, while the other was a more craft, chill, quiet zone. I really appreciated this room because I tend to get a little overstimulated, and I think is a really good idea, especially for these events where you're surrounded by a lot of people that you may not know. It's nice to have that kind of breakout room. So going into the hall, I was not really expecting to get much at the swap meet, with the exception of accessories. That was my focus for this con. I wanted head bows, I wanted jewelry, wrist cuffs, that sort of thing. The goal was to not add too many menu pieces, if any. Except I ended up getting this really cool skirt from Axis Femme from one of the swap vendors. It's green, which is my favorite color, and I had been feeling a bit more gothically inclined leading up to this event. On a whim, I ended up purchasing Moitier's Iron Gate re-release JSK in white, which I wore to the event. Um, so yeah, but overall, I was very impressed also that this was an Axis Femme piece and not an Alice and the Pirates piece. I do think Axis Femme is a Lolita fashion brand that tends to get overlooked, but I like their shoes and I like their other offerings, so it was really cool to have this kind of piece from them. The shirring is also amazing. I was reading on Lollibrary that the sizing goes up to 100 centimeters, so that's really impressive, especially for skirts. The other thing I got at the swap meet was some really cool pants. So outside of Lolita fashion, I tend to wear pants, specifically trip pants. The pants I got were super cool, and it was nice to have something to change out of to walk around in if Lolita fashion got to be too much. Funnily enough, for this event, I left my brown wig at home, and I had only brought my blonde wig, which I exclusively brought to cord with Iron Gate. So I was very limited this weekend. I used my natural hair on Saturday, and then for the tea party on Sunday, I ended up wearing the big white wig anyway, just because why not? Yeah. The panels that I went to on Saturday were the Dolphy one during the end, where they were going over their makeup look, and that's something that I'm really interested in. As someone who wears a lot of fashion masks, any makeup I do kind of has to be from the eyes up, so I'm always thinking of ways that I can jazz it up. So that was pretty cool. There was a Belladonna panel that I didn't end up going to just because it was back to back panels and I wanted to see what was at the swap meet. After I was done perusing the swap meet, I went to the brand collab ranking Boogaloo, which was super fun. The setup was you went in, you were given a bunch of cards that related to a ranking. They would project a brand collab piece. Audience members would rank it. You would be given the opportunity to state your piece. Is it good? Is it bad? Why? And that would usually be used to determine where on the tier list that item would go. I thought this was great, especially for a first day event, as it got the audience interacting with one another. I would have preferred more events like this. I think at the Tea Party, they did a really good job of audience, well, not audience, but of attendee interaction. There was a lot of really good icebreaker games. And I think if that happened on Saturday or Friday, it would have been really beneficial to get more attendees out of their comfort zone. I know I was feeling a little overwhelmed. Even seeing people that I had seen at Techo, I was still like very nervous. So, but this was a really fun one. So that wrapped up Friday, which ended up being a much shorter day. Um, yeah, it was a pretty short day. And then that's on to Saturday. Saturday, I wore my sweetest of looks for that day. It was Kumia's Floating Sky Tea Party or something to that effect, which I courted with a lot of pink and brown. I had planned to wear two cords this day as I had done at Techo. However, I found myself so busy between all of the panels and the vendors that I didn't have time to go back to change, nor did I have the energy to. So honestly, not bad. I packed a total of 4 corners for this event, one for each day, and then one for a half day, which would have been probably Saturday. Um, but I didn't end up bringing that piece out, which I think is totally fine. I definitely needed to give myself a bit of a breather. So I wore Kumiya Sky Tea Party with my natural hair. And unexpectedly, I came across someone wearing the ivory colorway of it, which was really fun. And then I also came across someone else who was planning on wearing, I believe, the pink colorway to the tea party on Sunday. So it's like, oh, we could have tripleted if only we knew. But it was still exciting. And even seeing all the varieties of alternate fashion and styles of Lolita that I don't personally wear or pieces I wouldn't normally see, it was just a really awesome event and I found it very inspiring. Saturday, the big thing for this day was the fashion show. I'll get to that a bit later as I go over my overall experience on Saturday. So Saturday was the only day that the vendors hall was open, and the vendor hall was packed with very talented people. I had gone to Kei-Con with the intention of only getting accessories, and the options, they were just, they were glorious. I also like that they included a few non-Lolita options just because I ended up only packing Lolita socks. And given that we had just done a large drive into Canada, I was really not wanting to do that drive back in below the knee ruffle socks just because it's not the most comfortable sock to sit that long in. So I was able to get some really cool socks from Ghost Girl Goods that I wore for the travel back. The first event that I went to that day was Kei-Con Quiplash, and it was at 9 in the morning. Now, initially, when I saw this, I was like, 9 in the morning, that's kind of a weird time to play Quiplash, but that shows my limited scope, I suppose, as I usually associate this with an more evening time event on Discord calls with long distance friends. So the fact that they had this early in the morning, It ended up being way better than I could have expected, again, because of that audience participation. It was set up where all the questions were specific to Lolita fashion, which I didn't know you could do with Quiplash. Um, Obviously, there was a limited number of people that could play each game, but you, as an audience member, could still participate and vote that way. So it'd be funny to see what the players voted for versus what the audience voted for. And it was really fun. I had a great time. It's also one where I'm like, I could have played this again, or for longer, either way. So that was really cool. After this, they had another panel I was interested, which was So You Want to Host an Event. As an event organizer in my own community, I also tend to think about how nice it would be to put on a larger scale Lolita event in my region. Unfortunately, I did not make it to this one just because every single panel was focused to my interest, which was great. But I just didn't have time to go to every single panel and then also the vendors hall, or also take a break if I needed it, which is a great problem to have and not one I've ever had before. I think they did a great job at having interesting panels. I guess my only suggestion would be maybe doing like a 5 or 10 minute break between each one. I know that might like throw it off a bit, but this also allows for if a panel runs a little longer or one ends a little shorter, people can have that space. The actual panel rooms themselves were also quite small. There were several that I went to where the seats were at capacity or past. Maybe not everyone, but I also have to imagine people were probably weighing the pros and cons of do I sit in on this panel or do I go shopping in the vendors hall? So I wonder how, I guess, attendance to panels could have changed depending on that. But that being said, there was still like so many panels that I think appealed to different people, and they did seem to be really popular. I liked all the ones I went to. So I went around the vendor hall and ended up getting quite a bit. So I'm either going to show my loot now or I'll show it towards the end if I don't splice it in here. So after I went around the vendor hall, which I was a little overwhelmed with just because there was a lot of vendors in a space that I think was almost a little too cramped for it when you have to navigate around other people who are in their poofiest. But I think if it would be possible to be a little bigger of a room, that'd be nice. That way, too, you have more of an option to look at each of the vendors. After this, I ended up going to the Hainuli Q&A, and so on, and that was a wonderful panel. They were the premier guest for the weekend, so they were sharing us a bit about like their story, how they got into the fashion, their experiences in the fashion, which I thought was really interesting, especially because Hainuli recently came back, from a hiatus. And then they also showcased some designs that were more behind the scenes, hush hush. And there were so many where I was like, oh, I need to start saving, which I think shows their versatility and also their strength because there was a lot of pieces that I was immediately drawn to, and I immediately was like, all right, what can I swap in my wardrobe to accommodate this piece? The next panel I went to was Alternative Minorities, the Darker Side of J Fashion, which was a panel hosted by Tooth Decay Accessories. And I thought this was a very helpful and well needed panel. And if you are looking for more information on this topic, definitely a lot of playlists out there. If you're looking for other types of discussion relating to this, I would highly recommend the YouTuber Marina Kei, as she has her talking podcast that interviews people in Lolita fashion, J fashion, and their experiences. After this was the pre-fashion show contest. This is where people could show off their cords, and at the end there would be a ranking and a prize. The panel hosts for this were Saxon Blues, Marina Kei, and Fluffy Joe, Fluffy Tori. Yeah. So we ended up deciding to stay as audience the whole time, and this was for my own selfish reasons of I wanted to see everyone's cord and what everyone was wearing. And I couldn't do that as easily if I was in it. Plus, I had seen some wonderful looks specifically inspired by the theme of Kei-Con, which was Haunted Doll. And I was like, oh, there's no competition here. um, so it was really cool to see that. And attendees who were participating in this particular event, they came in, they did their poses, and I thought it was nice that they were given a moment to talk about their cord, something that stood out to them, what inspired them. I thought that was really neat, and a thing I think should be included in other bigger tea parties like this, or events like this, really. Yeah, it was great, and the panel commentary was really funny as Marina Kay was giving tens to everyone. It was really cool to see people's interpretation of the theme Haunted Doll, as well as just the different looks people would come up with, and there was so many handmade accessories incorporated. I was really impressed by the crafty nature that this fashion tends to inspire from people. Yeah. Right after this, we had the fashion show, which was done in an atypical format. So, typical fashion shows that I have seen online and also that I experienced at Teco was there's a stage, they walk around the stage, the models do their poses, they show off the outfits, they exit the stage. At the end of that particular designer, all the models and the designers come to the front and they show off the stuff. So that's what I'm used to. It's like you sit as an audience member and it's kind of a flat, straight on view of the situation ahead. This was a lot more interesting, and it reminded me almost of like an America's Next Top Model runway show, how they tend to do more creative outlooks. Obviously, a lot safer and probably like way more ethical. So it was in the location that the tea party would be hosted. The venue itself was like a lounge mixed with like a bar food area. So you had different seating options. There was like a booth situation, there was round seats, there were regular seats, there were tables, there were not tables, and there was a pathway that was cleared for the models to walk around the room in. And in theory, everyone would have gotten a personal view as you're on the same level as the model. And I think I really like this idea a lot. It was a little awkward for me just because where we sat was in between two of the big model pose points. So to our left, the models would walk up, they would hold a pose. They would walk by us in a fluid motion. To the right, they would do the pose. Very rarely would the model stop and pose for my section, so I had to get like a quick look at either of the pose points or just view it very quickly. That was my only real complaint about it. I think it was harder for certain sections to be able to see and absorb the looks, but the looks themselves were very good. I left that fashion show having a higher view of everyone that participated. There were people that I wasn't familiar with that after this fashion show, I was like, oh, I need to make sure I'm following them so I can see what they're doing. If you want to see the fashion show, I would recommend going to Marina Kay's Instagram as she has footage of the event there. Another thing I'm going to do is after this, I will be adding all of the blog posts that I've seen about it, as well as links to videos that I've seen about this event, just because there was a lot of really good commentary people here. Not commentary, but just people who discuss Lolita fashion events. So I'm going to be linking their perspectives, experiences in the description, so highly recommend checking that out after. After the fashion show, one of our friends was in the fashion show, so we took this time to go get food with them, and we changed. At least I did. I put on my cool new pants, and I put on my cool Rad Key shirt that I love so much, and then I slapped a canneteer on my head, and I called it a day because I was tired. I don't know, I was just tired. It really took it out of me, this event, but in a good way. I think it was a lot of satisfaction all throughout. So there was a couple of other events during this time. There was a lot of panels I would have liked to go through. I just feel like the schedule was almost too packed to the point where there was just no way to see everything. But I did see more than I'd seen at other places just because the proximity of the rooms was really easy to traverse. So I think in terms of walking distance between the room, it was really great. There's been times where I'm at one side of an event and things I want are at the other side, and I have to decide if I'm willing to make that journey for that one thing. And I didn't have to decide that, which I really do appreciate. We came back in time for the Spilling Tea and Horror Stories, which was an interesting panel. Um, there were technical difficulties, I suppose, in the beginning. We came a little bit late since we were coming from dinner. So it was a lot of audience member participation of sharing their particular horror stories. And then when the panel got started, it was really interesting. It was a lot of Lolita 101, so where you should buy your clothes, where you shouldn't buy your clothes, what makes an outfit, that sort of thing. At the end, there was a little bit of extra time where the panel host invited the guests to once again share their experiences, if there was any horror stories that they felt inspired to tell us about. And that was karaoke, and I am not a singer, but I am someone who loves to dance, and I get swept up in music, and I love to dance. So while people were singing, I was dancing in the back, and I like that it was an environment where it felt welcome, where it was like, yeah, group sing along, yeah, dance if you want to. And I found it so much more fun than I would expect. There was also plenty of people that were just existing and participating that way, but it was a very welcoming environment and it was so much fun. After this, there was a after party of sorts. I personally, our group, we didn't go to it. It wasn't something that interested us. And also, I was just quite tired at the end of the day, and I was thinking about how I would have to go and get ready for tomorrow's event, so I definitely wanted some of that alone time. I think I am glad that I chose to do that just because I know I probably would have been too overwhelmed to enjoy the after party. If you're curious to what the after party was like, there were several blogs I read that talked about it, so I'll be linking those in the description. Then we had Sunday, which was the final day, and this day was exclusively planned for the tea party. This was a unique experience to me as someone that went to the anime convention where the vendors were only actually open on Saturday. So I had to make sure all my shopping was done then. I still think that makes sense. And because the only event of Sunday was the the tea party, that made it so that way vendors didn't have to run because it would just be awful to have to break down all your stuff to go to this other event, which you were also like, I don't know. It just seemed like a lot. So I'm glad that they chose to only do one thing this day, and it was the tea. It also made it so it was later in the day, so I didn't have to wake up very early. I didn't have to rush myself. I could just take my time. Tea party itself, I thought, did something really smart, which was icebreakers. There were so many fun icebreakers. As you checked in, you were given a slip of paper with the name of a dress. You then had to find your person that had the slip of paper you also had, which was a great way to interact with one another. There was also a bingo sheet, and it was stuff like has ever been to Japan, has made their own macarons, has modeled for a brand before. I thought this was just really cool. I thought it was really cool. Other icebreakers like create a Franken coordinate with those at your table, which was pretty cool. Um, it was in the same spot as the fashion show where it was like very open, and I actually did think that this worked better for the food itself. It made it easier to mingle with different people instead of everyone is sitting at a traditional table and you're kind of locked into that seat. My worries about this event was with the dietary restrictions. I had marked when I bought my ticket that I was vegetarian and dairy free. I'm lactose intolerant, so really, if I don't get dairy, that's the ideal situation. I brought my lactate pills because when I went to Teco, everything had dairy in it. And I was like a little nervous coming in here because I didn't know what to expect. And I'm kind of mixed about it. So the price for this ticket was a lot, and for good reason. The food was definitely fancier if you were not someone with dietary restrictions. And on top of that, the sponsorships, like the giveaway prizes were amazing. There was so many giveaways that I feel like more people than not won at least one thing over this weekend, if not in one of the panels, then for sure at this event, the Tea Party. There were good prizes too. I ended up winning a petticoat, and I thought I got all the petticoats I needed already, but this one actually fit a niche that I didn't know I needed until after. The main sponsor was 42 Lolita, which I thought was a really big deal. And I think it's really cool that we can kind of pull on that as a potential Lolita fashion sponsor. And I'm going to do like another big shout out to Tooth Decay Accessories for running the sponsorship section. I think they did an exceptional job at it. In fact, we went overtime because of how many giveaways there were at the end, which is a really good problem to have. But now I want to get onto the food, which is where I'm very torn. So, as someone with these dietary restrictions, I did have a hard time figuring out where I was supposed to eat, but not because of, I guess, the Kei-Con staff. Um, so, they had specified that if you were vegan, your food was in a different location. But I'm not vegan. I'm vegetarian and dairy free, which I realize to a lot of people essentially means vegan. But I love eggs. I will eat any kind of egg. And honey, like things like that, I don't mind. So I wasn't really sure where I was supposed to go. The answer was I was one of the vegan options. And my problem here is that the food options between the vegan and the non vegan were not comparable at all in terms of presentation or, I guess, like fanciness, if we're going to put it that way. So the non vegan options, which were for the majority of people, they had really fancy looking deviled eggs. They had a truffle eclair. They had a smoked salmon brioche. They had sliders. They had, what else was it? They had a polenta cake, which looked really good. I think those were the main things, but I don't really remember. Um, yeah, so they had a lot of really cool, I guess more like fancier, high dining, fine dining type of foods, right? And those were their savories. The savory for me in the vegan option was a hummus wrap. And while it was edible and it didn't taste bad because I love hummus, I think when I got my plate of food and I sat down next to my friends who had the like non-dietary restriction food, aesthetically it was very different. And I wasn't like, oh, I can't wait to take a picture of my food, which is something that I think a lot of people do when they go to tea parties, because my food was not very cute. It was very regular. Like I could get this at a majority of places. Their food was definitely a lot more exciting and a lot more aesthetically picked for the time, which then brings me into the desserts. The desserts for my friends looked awesome. They had eyeball desserts. They had a coffin that had like a little sprinkle on it to make it look like a cross. They had they just had so many cute desserts. And my options were a white vanilla raspberry brittle, which was very sour. I got a chocolate cake with very sour dots on it. And I say cake, but it was like a thin layer of something, and it was pretty dry. And then the best part here was vegan cookies, which just looked like a round ball ish of cookie. So there was no care really taken into the aesthetic or taste of my food, it felt like, especially when 2/3 of my desserts were sour, um, and very sour at that. and my food was just not that exciting. It looked totally different, but not in a way where it was like, oh, you're on the same level. I definitely felt like I wasn't. So food wise, I can only comment on the stuff that I could eat. My wrap, it was good. It was a hummus wrap. My desserts, they were way too sour for my taste. The vegan cookie was really good though, and I would eat more of it. What I heard from the attendees that were not getting the dietary options were very mixed. There were people that loved what they had, in terms of the savories, and there were people that did not like what they had. There were people with texture issues where the amount of, I guess, like the truffle part and the salmon brain brioche, there was just a lot of smooth texture. So a lot of people with texture issues didn't really like that. But there are also people that loved things like the polenta cake, and people who didn't really have those same texture issues. I heard that they really enjoyed it as well. So it really depends on who you ask for food. So overall, that was my experience at Kei-Con 2023 in Toronto. I would say I viewed this event very highly, and I would go back immediately if it were coming back. It may be on a bit of a hiatus just due to financial issues, but if it comes back and when it's announced, I do intend to go. It's really nice to have a big Lolita and J fashion event on this side of North America instead of having to travel even further, to the West Coast or to Europe. I think it was very clear the amount of care and thought that went into making sure attendees had a great time, and I did have a great time. Um, all the staff I interacted with were very kind. There was a lost and found section, which I found very helpful. I don't really have any huge complaints other than the catering was not as ideal in terms of the level of food I would have expected for the price and compared to my peers. And what is it? I think spacing of the panels, if there was more of a break in between panels, I think that would have been beneficial, not only to the hosts, but also to the attendees. So now, if I haven't done it already, I'm going to break out into my loot reel, which is where I show you everything I got and I talk about it and I give the sources of who made it. The vendors hall was packed with talent. I got a lot of beautiful accessories and art that I cannot wait to share with you. Insert the thing. The first batch of items you'll be seeing here is from the remote vendor table. I was also really excited to see that Lolliberry had such a huge presence at this event. So I was happy to buy a tote to support them further, and I also got 3 pins as well as a cute key ring. See that I got 2 rings from Strawberry Teapot Shop, and this big iron patch is from Puvathel. Next to those we have some rings from Starglazed Octopi. Following that, we have 2 necklaces from Tooth Decay Accessories. I was really excited to see their shop when I went to Teco, and I had gotten a really cute lemon wedge necklace. Next to Tooth Decay Accessories necklaces, we have Belladonna, where I got a white head bow as well as a Saks pair of wrist cuffs. Up next, we have Sam Hines Song Macrons. I got this purple one, which is super cute and will match really well with my pink Baby the Stars Shine Bright Marine Island JSK. Following that, we have Hainuli, where I was able to purchase a version of their story, as well as a beautiful white bat-shaped head bow, which again I was thinking more gothic would be helpful. I also got a wax sealing set, which I thought was really cute, and I believe it came with 2 colors of wax. Next up, we have Dream Cathedral, which was really difficult of a booth for me just because I loved all the different Goblin colors that they had. This was going to be beneficial for my old school pieces as well as my Iron Gate JSK. After that is a big haul from See Me. See Me. Yeah. This was a very difficult booth for me just because I love having prints, especially Lolita fashion prints. On top of that, they had a lot of Kumya and Usakumya accessories, and Yeah, they had a lot of really good accessories. It was hard to walk away. Following that, we have Cosmic Tears, and I loved his booth so much. There was a lot to look at. A bunch of it was deco, which was really cool to see. But one of the things that caught my eyes as soon as I went in front of this booth was this really cute teddy bear with green accessories. And of course, the big thing for me here was also this really cool and spacious jewelry box. It was two-tiered and it also has four divided up sections, so I thought this would be a really nice place to store my rings and really tidy up my vanity space. Something I didn't realize until recording this was that there was a tiny mirror inside. It's just really cute and it brings me a lot of joy whenever I see it. This artist also does commissions, and I'm really interested in getting some done of my characters. Up next, we have the Kei-Con gift bag. Within the tote bag, we would have a variety of things from the different vendors and featured guests at this event. Hopping back into the vendors hall to share this particular masterpiece. I saw this while doing a final loop in the vendors hall before it would close, and I'm really glad I did. My only regret is that I did not buy more from all of my friends. This beautiful dual side bag is by Monster Cliche on Instagram. So as I said earlier, would I go back to Kei-Con? Yes. Would I recommend Kei-Con if you're into Lolita fashion? Absolutely. This event really inspired me to do a lot more with the fashion than I initially intended. It even inspired me to start planning potential panels that I would like to host, whether it's at local conventions or at bigger conventions like this. So if you want to know more about the event, I will be linking to people who also went. This will be a combination of vlog posts as well as blog posts. So there's something for everyone. If you prefer to read, there's reading material. And if you prefer to watch or to listen, there's going to be some of that too. Um, if you're looking for more of my stuff, you can find me on Tumblr and on Instagram at Royal Sealy. Although I will be way more active on Tumblr as I'm on and off trying to distance myself from Instagram. I just don't find it as fun a place. I'm also working on a NeoCities, which I will eventually link when I finish that. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful day. Here's a little close-up of my blouse today. It is by Sleepyland Lolita. It has these little detachable brooch pins that I put here at my waist just because it balances a bit better. This is their cut sew. I got it in a size 1 and I find it to be extremely comfortable and breathable.